So the other people, Ted Cole, Robert Arnn, they don't have their pictures on there, but I'm trying to think, have you been to our meetings before? Or, I just want to know if there's anyone new, where you're from, and, just want to welcome you. But I think you guys have both been to our meetings before. And Tom, Tom Pratt, or Tom R. Okay.
Sort of.
Can you unmute him?
I can't.
Oh, he needs to. So unmute.
He is not muted.
Okay.
But he's not. We can't hear him. Tom, we can't hear you.
Okay.
We also have Chuck checking in from Denver, and he's got the email from Fract. So thanks for sending that out, David.
Well, thank you, Robert Arnn, for giving us permission to do that, to send out the invitation to Frac.
David, your wife is with you there? Is she? Hi. You're muted. But yeah, so great to have her too. It's great.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I want to thank John and David Elmore and John Williams for working on this together. I didn't have to do anything, and I can just sit here and enjoy. So I appreciate the work they put into making this all happen.
Leonard's not doing a part tonight, right?
He'll be back. He's working on a story for Scientific American on the the Artemis Accord, looking for ice on the moon, and whether the US should be able to, or any country, be able to do all that, and without, whether there's permission for that, I think is sort of the story. But so he's been transcribing, but I think he'll be up a little later.
Well, I just wanted to make sure he wasn't doing a space update. I didn't prepare anything.
Yeah,
so
no, we just want to do David Elmore's talk today, I think. Right. Richard Carver, hello.
Hello, how are you? Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can hear you great, Richard. Well, gee, I don't have.
Go ahead, John, if you want to start it.
Yeah, I don't have any sort of introduction for David beyond what you already saw on the email.
Well, I can say one thing. In 2 weeks, we'll have Alan Ladwig giving a presentation. I think it will be mostly on his book on space tourism that came out recently. But I told him he could do anything. Oh, what?
Everyone froze.
Everyone froze.
Oh, we froze?
No, I can hear you.
Okay.
So tell us who Alan Ladwig is.
So Alan Ladwig, he's a very old friend of Leonard and I. He lives in the Washington, D.C. area. And he was one of the head NASA administrators, not head NASA, but, under policy quite a while ago. And he is retired now, but he wrote a book recently that came out on space tourism. It's sort of a history of that, and then looking at what's available now. And he's a great speaker, like all of our speakers with SkyWatchers. And he's the first of people from out there that we're trying to kind of bring in, since we have this opportunity, experts that are good speakers who can bring, since we can't afford to fly them out to meetings in person, we're trying to set up a number of people who could come and talk to us on Zoom. And, again, we really want your input. I think, John, you were working on a survey that we'll maybe send out
I
to
gotta
get a
do
little
that.
more input.
I got it together. If it looked good to you, I'll send it out this week, but I didn't do that. I need to do that.
Get a glass of wine, actually, and check with Leonard. But why don't you go ahead and start it if you want, John? I'll be right back.
All right. David, you want to take it away?
I can do that.
Go for it.
Do we have a screen here?
Mhm.
Yes.
Excellent. This work started in 1980 with the dating of Ansel Adams' Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico. And since then, I've been intrigued by dating other interesting, famous images, events, using astrometry, location of objects in the sky, as well as celestial events, things like conjunctions, comets, whatever could be used. For Hernandez, New Mexico, do people know this image?
It's by some famous photographer, right?
Some famous photographer. He's Ansel Adams, and this is a photo of him about the same time that he took this photograph. It's kind of interesting for lots of reasons. It's probably his most famous image. Not necessarily his favorite, but for the world. A print of this image, just a print, sold for $609,000.
Wow.
So if you bought that print, you might want to know when it was taken. And Ansel Adams was notorious for doing a terrible job at documenting when he did things. He did a terrific job of documenting exactly how he did things, but there was a question of whether this image was taken in 1941 or 1943 or 1944. We do know that Adams was in New Mexico. He was doing work for the War Department. Actually, just before the Second World War, they were redecorating and they wanted landscapes taken by him from the West. And he was staying in Santa Fe and photographing this particular day north near Chama. He had a not very successful day photographing up there. One report says that on his way back south, he stopped at Ghost Ranch to visit his friend Georgia O'Keeffe. And then they continued on south, and he saw this image to his left, driving down the road in Hernandez, New Mexico, brought the car to a halt. His son was with him at age 7, who's apparently remembers it well and has written about the event. And he had another friend with him in the car. And he gave instructions to get out equipment and set up on top of his automobile so he could take an image with his 8x10 is what he had with him that particular day. Pretty big camera. The scene was intriguing to him because of course, New Mexico landscape, beautiful clouds over the Sangre de Cristos in New Mexico. And then the sunlight was hitting the graves markers in the foreground in front of the church. So got the equipment out, got set up, ready to take an image, and he couldn't find his light meter. But he knew that the moon is 250 foot candles. And he knew the f-stop of the camera that he was going to be using. And he knew the sensitivity of the film, the what we call ISO now, but ASI then. And he had inserted a green filter into the camera. So in his head, he had to make corrections for all of these things, knowing how bright the moon was, and then figuring out what exposure time to take. And so 1 second was his exposure time, pulled out his film holder, flipped it over, put it back in the camera, pulled the dark slide on the other side of the holder so he could take another exposure, because he knew he really wanted to have more than one. And by that time, the sun had dipped below the clouds and the markers were no longer illuminated. So that was it, one shot. Took a lot of notes on the exposures and so forth, so he knew how to develop and process the image once he was done with that. Beaumont Newhall, friend of Ansel Adams and many other famous photographers and artists, the first director of the Department of Photography of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. He wrote the book on the history of photography. This is the reference for people who are studying history of photography. But he wanted to make sure that this particular image was correctly dated. So in 1980, he wrote letters to photographers at observatories around the country. The photographer at the Sacramento Peak Observatory in Sunspot, New Mexico, friend of mine, got one of the letters and passed it on to me. And what Beaumont Newhall was suggesting was that the moon could be used to help identify when this image was taken. And Dick Fowler, my friend, thought that I would be able to do that. And I thought so too. So I wrote Beaumont back, and then we got on the phone, and I went up to Santa Fe, and then we drove up together to Hernandez to the site of the image. And my thought was, well, we can just short circuit this whole effort by looking for gravestones. So suppose there was a gravestone that was visible in the image that we didn't see on the ground, or one that we saw on the ground that wasn't in the image. So we could determine that the photograph was taken before a particular time. So Beaumont Newhall had a print by Ansel Adams of Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico with him. So we headed down to the site. Dick Fowler had warned me that he'd been chased out of the church at gunpoint. So we really ought to introduce ourselves. So we went over to this house, and as best we could with our several languages, let the residents know what we were going to do, and then went out to the cemetery carrying the Moonrise Hernandez print, looking for grave markers between 1941 and 1944. Well, it turns out all the ones of interest were kind of over the hill in this area, and that we couldn't determine what the date was that way, what year the photograph was taken. So that meant that I actually had to do some work. So astrometry is measuring locations of celestial objects. So I needed to determine the azimuth and elevation of objects in the image, and then compute the azimuth and elevation of objects for the sky for particular dates when this might occur. So for the image, I had a compass with me. I really should have had a real live theodolite, because then I could have gotten much better azimuths and actually gotten elevations cited correctly. But I cited various targets and wrote down the compass readings that I got. And then I wanted to trim these up to make them more accurate. So I went to a topographic map. So here's that section of New Mexico. Santa Fe is kind of off the topo map to the bottom, then Espanola. Here's Hernandez over here on the left. And then people who know the area might be interested. Up here is House and the New Mexico Sangre de Cristos. And then I could, on the map, mark the azimuth angles of various peaks in the Sangre de Cristos. And then I would have some peak that I had written down that was nearby, and I could trim up that azimuth so I could get really accurate measurements. And here's my worksheet from 1980, where I had a column with, here's the azimuth of various peaks. I see Trompas Peak, Jicarilla Peak, Truchas Peak, what its altitude was on the topo map. And then I corrected for the curvature of the Earth to get a corrected altitude so I could identify which peak was which. I don't expect you to read this and determine whether the numbers are right or not. So then I went back to the Sacramento Peak Observatory. And I suppose I could have used the Nautical Almanac, but I wanted to write a computer program to predict where the moon would be and also the elevation of the sun, because it had to be high enough in the sky to illuminate the grave markers. So another friend at the observatory was an astrologer. Well, you don't look at scans. Astrologers have to know where the sun, the moon, and the planets are. And this particular astrologer had written a program to do that, which was just what I wanted. So I was able to borrow his deck of cards that smelled like wood smoke, since this particular program lived in a hovel out in the woods and walked into the observatory every day. That's okay. Read the deck of cards into the main lab computer, wrote that out on the mag tape, carried the mag tape to my computer, and here I am working in front of that computer. But this device right behind me was very special. This was a disk drive. It had 14-inch diameter platters. Each platter could hold 1.25 megabytes of data. And I had 4 of them. So my whiz-bang computer had 5 megabytes of disk storage, which is big enough to allow me to get his subroutine read in and then write a program that would allow me to enter the azimuths and elevations of targets in the image and then compute where the moon would be to superimpose on that graphically. So here's a light version of the Moonrise image. And I took a piece of transparency to a reproduction that I had, traced out some of the features in the image, took it to a photocopier, adjusted its size so it was the same size as my little graphics terminal, and then put a transparency on the terminal, and then used the cursor on the terminal to trace the lines on the image, including the church and the moon, so that I could tell the computer program where the azimuths and elevations of targets were. So then I started with particular dates. And actually, for some reason, I started in 1944. For dates in the autumn, we do know that was the case, and predicted where the moon would be. And most of them didn't come anywhere close to the moon. They were completely out of the field of view. Maybe they'd come across the field over here somewhere. But for Halloween 1941, the predicted positions of the moon went right through where it was on the image. So I had not only the year, which is what we were going for, but a day and a time for when Ansel Adams took this photograph.
Amazing.
So this was great. We had the year. Beaumont Newhall was happy. He sent the results to Ansel Adams, who sent me a postcard from Carmel. Postcard, of course, was Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, but with a message on the back thanking me for this. Included me in a book he published a couple of years later called Examples, the Making of 40 Photographs. So it was kind of nice being famous for a while. On the 50th anniversary of this photograph, Sky and Telescope magazine, which was also 50 years old that year, published an article on Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico by Dennis Tachiko. I'm sure many of you have read his articles and reviews. He still writes. And he was looking at the image and he thought that it was not quite right for the phase of the moon. He thought the moon appeared more full than what it would have been on Halloween. And by the 1990s, there were actual computer programs you could buy and run on your PC that could do these calculations. And he came out with a solution that disagreed with me and contacted me and let me know what he'd concluded. And I went back and revisited my calculations. Again, you don't need to read everything that's in here, but I concluded that I didn't have the correct horizon in my image. And just sighting with a compass and not having a theodolite meant that I really didn't have a good indication of where the horizon was. So if we look at where the moon rose on 31st of October of 1941, that little vertical green line is the azimuth of Moonrise. And then you look at the 1st of November 1941. And then you say, well, here's my horizon that I had just picked on the image. I took that line kind of at the base of the mountains. And my calculation gave a perfect solution for that afternoon. But if you'd picked a horizon here, you also got a solution. And in fact, the way the terrain rose, leaving Hernandez going across the valley towards the Sangre de Cristos, this is actually where the horizon was. So I was off for a day by day. Would answer the question that Beaumont Newhall had, what year was it? But it was a little embarrassing having the date not quite perfect. But anyway, it was a really fun exercise to do these calculations, meet Beaumont Newhall, walk around the cemetery with a Moonrise print in my hand. So that was how things stood for a while. But Beaumont Newhall had another question. Anyone know this image?
Looks
So
like Ellis Island.
Exactly. So this is called Steerage by Alfred Stieglitz. This is him about the time that he did this image in 1908. And it's often cited as an example of emigrants to the US. And emigration was at a peak at that time. But Beaumont Newhall had investigated the route of the steamer that Alfred Stieglitz was on when he took this image going to Europe. And decided that maybe it would be possible using the shadows on the gangplank up there to compute the azimuth and altitude of where the sun was when the image was taken. And in fact, he knew that the steamer had stopped 2 different locations, once going to the US, once going back to the UK, knew the orientation of the ship when it stopped, and had computed the azimuth of the sun for those dates, but it also looked at the stanchion on the gangplank and calculated the elevation of the sun at the time of the image. And then asked me to calculate where it actually was, and where the steamer was stopped on the way to the US, the maximum elevation the sun could have attained was 58 degrees. Beaumont Newhall had come up with 67. On the trip back to the UK, I computed that it could be as high as 64 degrees, which within our margin of error was pretty close to 67. So this image was taken going back to the UK. So these were the people who were rejected at Ellis Island and going back to Europe.
Wow.
So this was kind of getting fun. A few years later, Kay and I were at an exhibit at the Tate Britain that showed images, paintings that are called nocturnes by J.M.W. Turner and by James Whistler and by Claude Monet. And this was the first image when you came into the exhibit. It's not much bigger than your computer screen. It's called Moonlight, A Study at Millbank by J.M.W. Turner. And this is him about the time that he did this painting. He was still in art school at the time, had an exhibit of watercolors and so forth at the school. And in the blurb for the show, there was kind of a little section about wondering whether this could have been his first oil painting. And in the documentation for the art show, it said it was 1797. So Kay turned and looked at me and said, "I know what you're thinking." So after going through this fabulous show with Turner, Whistler, and Monet doing common subjects, nocturnes, the Houses of Parliament, Venice, we stopped at the museum shop to buy a card so I could use that to help me do the research. And what I was thinking was I could use conjunctions because an artist couldn't possibly get the perfect location of the moon and some bright planet, and then use a planetarium program to find when that conjunction occurred. So in the museum shop, the print showed up background extremely well, but they had touched out the planet. And in fact, in the blurb that went along with the show, there was no planet whatsoever visible, but we knew where it was. So I could run an astronomy program, a planetarium program, this is Carte du Ciel, and see when I could have the moon rising from Millbank in London with a bright planet nearby. And here's the moon and Jupiter. And here's how it compares to his oil painting. Turner had an amazing eye. So he sketched this standing by the banks of the Thames and then went back to his studio to paint it. Here's the, let me go forward, the solution from Stellarium. There's the moon and Jupiter near the horizon at an azimuth of 114 degrees. And here's the date, August 19, 1796, not 1797. And sure, you could nail it to 10:30 at night, high latitude. That's when the moon was rising in the summertime. Kind of check what's going on. Here's a picture of where J.M.W. Turner did all of his landscapes along the Thames. And this particular one was over here where the Tate Britain is now located on Millbank. And you could see that he was looking along the shore across to the other side, azimuth of 114 degrees. So that all hung together. But this indicates that Moonlight, a study at Millbank, was most likely his first oil painting, where it was sketched a year before what it's been attributed to since then. So pictures, paintings, we can have more fun. Here's a stone that was discovered in Forsyth County, Georgia, United States of America, Georgia, that astroarchaeologists have interpreted with celestial events. So Sagittarius, the galactic center, Antares, and what they attribute to a supernova of 546 AD. So these particular astroarchaeologists think that that was the approximate date that the Native Americans created this petroglyph in Georgia. This particular talk was originally, well, not very close to this one, but it was given to a forensic science class at the law school at the University of New Mexico. And so I was giving them some other techniques that might apply. Our computer clocks are notoriously poor, but we have a lot of these surveillance camera images. And here's one from the Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope site. But it's pretty poor. If something had occurred on this site, and the clock had been wrong, they wouldn't know how to deal with it. But if you take 10 images and stack them, you can significantly improve the signal to noise. So using our amateur astronomer techniques, we can help improve quality of images and possibly make them useful for forensic astronomy. And so this particular one shows the Southern Cross, and then down to the left of them, Alpha and Beta Centauri. So objects in the sky could be visible. And then we know the azimuth over to the dome at the Mies Observatory, and there's indeed an illumination and shadow by the moon. So by modeling the moonlight falling on a sphere, you could compute where it is and then back out a date when this image had to be recorded. So gee, let's get really greedy and keep going for even more popular images. How about this one? Well, it's got potential. Here's the moon over here. Here's what looks like a bright planet. Maybe some other stars. Oh, is this the Milky Way through here? Well, we know from Vincent van Gogh when this painting was done. He was in communication, wrote a lot of letters to his brother Theo, so we know down to the day when it was actually done. And we also know that this is not a real scene, that the cypress tree and the village were all his concepts. And maybe he had seen a sky that looked great that he had an impression of that he put in the background, but there's no way this could be dated. But back to Moonrise. That was a fun project, and I've had a lot of fun relating stories about it to people in the years since. Do we have any questions?
I've got two comments. One is, if I understand you correctly, astrology actually contributed to science here.
You are exactly right.
Wow.
Without that astrologer who lived in the hovel in the woods and had a deck of cards that smelled like wood smoke, this would not have happened.
And my other thought is, I see a CBS series coming out of this, that's CSI Astrometry.
It could be. There are interesting stories of various people having, over the years, done a lot of using images to explain when a particular crime could have occurred. And there was actually an article in Sky and Telescope last year where a professor saw an image of a shadow on the wall with a potential suspect to a crime in that image. And he showed at trial that the suspect could not possibly have been at the scene of the crime.
Yeah, I have a question or a comment. Back many, many decades ago, my colleague Bill Hartman, who was on the Condon Commission that investigated UFOs and flying saucers, used a lot of techniques like this to try to identify reports of flying saucers and so on. I'm wondering if you've applied these techniques to any UFOs.
Not UFOs. I do have colleagues at the Lockheed Martin Solar and Astrophysics Lab in Palo Alto, California, that worked with the FBI on identifying the Atlanta Olympics bomber. And there was a video of the bomber sitting on a bench of relatively low quality. But the scientists at Lockheed Martin were able to warp and rearrange the position of that so they could superimpose numerous frames of that video and reconstruct an image of the potential bomber.
Cool.
I have a few comments and a question.
Okay.
In the 90s, I lived in Evergreen and
And
drove
saw
down.
some UFOs, right?
Pardon?
And saw UFOs?
No.
Oh, okay.
I used to drive down to Albuquerque a lot to see my wife's mother, and we would drive right past here. But the highway is now on the other side of the church, I believe, in this picture. And but I never knew that, you know, we were anywhere near that spot, but I knew about that picture.
Yeah.
And then I've visited Santa Fe several times, and in the 90s, mid 90s,
Married to.
there was a print, a 40 by 60 print of this
Yes.
for $6,400. And then about 10 years later, the same print was $64,000. And you said one sold for 600 some thousand.
609,000. It may be the same print because it sold several times. And that's very large. Was it a pretty light print?
No, it was dark, and it was in the same gallery in Santa Fe, 10 years apart roughly.
It's probably not the 609,000 one. That was printed
Probably
by
not.
Adams in 1948, which is when he was printing them a little lighter than this.
Okay, well then a question. You said that he was using a green filter, but I thought he used red filters more
I
often.
did too, until I reread his description of making the print and his examples of making the 40 prints, and he actually had the Ratten filter number. I think it was a 14.
15?
14.
Question.
Mhm.
Well, a 15 is an orange filter.
Yeah. So this is a 14, I think.
Okay.
If you really want to know, I can go back to the book and check it out. It wasn't a 58, which is a commonly used green.
That's a deep green, yeah.
Yeah.
I can look it up too. A
So about
14.
the highway, in order to shoot the azimuths, I had to have the foreground aligned with the background. So I had to align things like the cross with this notch in the mountains,
Right.
and this pole with this peak. And so I got out of the car when we went out there and walked around so I could align those, so I knew where Ansel Adams had stopped the car. And it turns out that at that time it was in the southbound lane of the then 2-lane road that went through Hernandez, same side of town, quite exactly where the image was taken. And that's now been replaced by a 4-lane road. And you have to know exactly when to look, and you get about a half a second as you're driving by, and you can see down to where the church is, but it looks completely different. There's a warehouse in front that obscures most of this, and the church now has a pitched roof, so it doesn't look at all like the same scene.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Kathleen, you had a question?
What's and I'm way behind you guys that know filter numbers. What is the definition of azimuth? Horizontal target?
Well,
I've never heard the word before.
azimuth and altitude or azimuth and elevation. I actually have it on one of my slides here. And which one did I put it on? I think
Your arrow went across the bottom when you were talking about azimuth, but I wasn't, yeah.
There we go, that one. Okay. So did that get cut off on your screen?
No, I saw it, but I know what an elevation of a mountain is.
Yeah, okay.
Or
So
the
azimuth
elevation.
goes from 0 to 360 degrees.
Okay.
North is 0.
Okay.
East is 90. South is 180. West is 270. And then back to 0 at north.
Okay.
So then I could identify in that circle where objects were on the ground and then in the sky.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. We've
Well,
come to the stop.
Question or comment.
Wait,
I just
I've
looked
got a
at,
question.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, John.
a 13 is a green and a 15 is a deep yellow. And there is no 14 on this list that I just
Oh,
found.
so it's got to be a 13 then, because I know what a 12 is because I used one of
Yes.
those in the eclipse. So,
Right.
David, you mentioned, I think it was Theodolite? Do I have that right?
I can't hear you, Barb.
Oh, okay,
There we go. We got you now.
okay. I think
We had you. Now we don't.
I'm unmuted here, so, okay.
Okay, you're
close to
clear
the
now.
microphone.
What?
Stay close to the microphone.
Okay. Yeah. Theodolite, I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
What exactly is that?
It's just a swanky compass that has elevation as well as azimuth. It's
Okay.
often it's a surveyor's tool.
Okay.
So
Great.
if I'd had one of those, I would have known exactly what the elevations were, and as opposed to after being shown that I didn't get it right, having to go back and then infer it from apparent elevations of mountains in degrees as opposed to feet, which is what I did to start with.
I have a question. So the guy that wrote you and said that the phase of the moon wasn't right for the date that you'd identified, he could tell the difference between November 1st and October 31st?
Yeah, let's see if I've got an example here. So this is a late Ansel Adams print. And kind of see how it looks like we're, 3 days before full or something like that. And let's see, chink, chink, chink. All right, ignore the text, but in between, here's the moon and one of his early prints that was more exposed. And this looks like we're almost coming up on full. So Dennis DeChico was astute enough to know what the original print looked like, and that actually the moon looked like it was closer to full than would have been on that day. And he, by the 1990s, had a planetarium program, and he could easily determine what the phase of the moon was and how close to full it was.
Any
The
more questions?
background still
Oops,
looks
sorry.
good.
Sorry, David.
This is a fabulous presentation, and I wanted to let all of you know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Barb. That I have a good friend who paints the New Mexico landscape prolifically, and he lives in Denver. He's from New Mexico, and his name is Lorenzo Chavez. You can look for him online, but he loves painting these old communities in New Mexico. So thought I would share that.
Oh, there's so much to see in New Mexico. My friend, who was chased out of the church at gunpoint, was photographing churches in New Mexico. And this was one. The high road to Taos has a number, and they just go on and on. Another friend was photographing windmills in New Mexico. Right. And then there are artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, who were just drawn to the Southwest. I think you could be just plopped down in New Mexico, not knowing where you came from or where you were, and you would know that that's where you were, just looking around at the sky and making light.
Unless you were outside Taos around the Earthship houses, and then you'd kind of wonder. They remind me of the lecture that was done on living on Mars.
Oh my.
They kind of remind me of the Mad Hatter.
So why was your friend chased out of the church with a gun?
Well, wasn't necessarily welcome. Just outsider wandering around.
That happens in little small communities, not only in New Mexico, but here in Colorado and Kansas.
Opry Canyon.
Okay, I haven't been chased around by a gun here, but you know, I've heard of it in other places. So what's
I got chased out of the field in Kansas photographing a windmill.
Mm-hmm.
So it's next, David. What other images have you found that you have been curious about?
Well, whenever Kay and I wander into some art exhibit somewhere, who knows what might show up.
Well, but I didn't know if you had something in mind that has this, escaped your talent.
I do not. There's actually a professor at the University of North Texas who does this research and recruits students. And they actually went to London to stand on the banks of the Thames where J.M.W. Turner did Moonrise. They've also dated what is it called? Ansel Adams' photograph of Half Dome. I think it's called Moon over Half Dome. And they've dated that image using the position of the moon.
I thought it was interesting when we talked the other day, you said that Ansel Adams was very good about taking notes about how he adjusted his photos, you know, what he dodged here and what he burned there. But it was surprising that he didn't carry that on to when he took photos or exactly where he took the photos.
Yeah, that was curious, and he mentions that in his book about how poor he was. But you look at his notes on how he makes his prints, and it's just exactly where are you going to hold the card when you're dodging at the base of the mountains, and he describes exactly how to do that.
Did he do that so he could be consistent later with a reprint or something like that?
Yeah. But he did say that no two Moonrise prints are the same.
Oh, really? No two are the same.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know, I mean, how you, as a kid, and, you know, as you went through teenage years and on, how did you get so interested in, you know, just astronomy and of course you've been involved with, you know, solar astronomy. But what were your inspirations? Were there teachers, you know, adults in your life, your parents? Did Kay influence this, your wife, later too? Or I don't know when you got together, but, you know, can you tell us a little bit about how you just were inspired to pursue this career?
Yeah, interest in astronomy, I think, came from my third grade elementary school teacher. And she would let students know about events in the sky. And I'm not sure exactly what the timing was or whether it was her who put me onto this, but I remember seeing a Jupiter and Saturn conjunction around that time. And actually they're coming up on a conjunction again here in the next couple of years. So I think it's the second one after that. We can figure out how old I am from there. And then another one was watching Sputnik 3 re-enter that occurred right over Birmingham, Alabama, where I was. And my sister and I went out on a big rock in the backyard and sat there and watched this thing go across the sky. So, and then I was anxious to get a telescope, and my parents got me a telescope, elementary school age, and had a lot of fun going out looking at planets. I really like globular clusters. So yeah, that's where that came from, I think.
We're just glad he stuck with the National Solar Observatory.
Barb, you still need to get up close to the computer.
Yeah, just what kind of telescope did they buy you? Because it must have been a pretty good one if you could see globular clusters.
AC Gilbert, 4.5 inches. Newtonian reflector.
Okay.
Did Ansel ever get to use digital cameras?
Did
Did he
Ansel
die
Adams?
before that?
I'm not aware. So he died in 1984.
So he
right?
didn't use Photoshop on something? No, that's before Photoshop.
Yeah, it was before Photoshop.
Yeah.
And before digital cameras.
Mm-hmm.
At least the commercial ones.
Makes it all the more amazing.
But it's interesting, he was doing, as John Williams has pointed out, using techniques in the darkroom like what we do now with our images. Saying, well, I want to expose this area a little more or that area a little less, stretch it different ways. He even modified the negative after he had already taken it and was frustrated with the amount of work he had to do in the darkroom. He changed the density of the negative up in the upper part to reduce the amount of work he had to do on the print.
Spend a lot more time in the darkroom than doing the photography.
Mm-hmm.
David, are you also a photographer?
Yes. Oh,
The other David.
other David.
That takes snapshots.
Oh, come on.
Just a few.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a number of astrophotographers in our group.
I'd just like to comment that I think now we spend a lot more time in front of the computer and Photoshop than taking the pictures also.
Agreed.
You've done that too, John, I know.
Do a wedding.
Hours.
Well, I don't know about hours, but the, it's interesting as you hear a lot of times, well, Ansel Adams was a pure photographer, but he really adjusted his pictures for the same reasons we do it now, for the way it looks, bringing out this detail or that detail. And I can't tell you, I used to sit in a dark room and dodge and burn and develop my photos from film. And when Photoshop came along, I was like, well, crud, I do the same old things in Photoshop that I did in the darkroom. And it was in some ways more fun in Photoshop, but in other ways it was more fun to be in the darkroom. I mean, digital photography now is so forgiving that's nice. But I mean, at least, Ansel Adams took this one photo just once, because he lost out on the light. And now we don't think anything of banging away 20 or 30 shots of the same thing just so we have something,
Cost has gone down too.
Oh.
That's probably pretty expensive plate to take that.
Yeah, this was an 8x10 negative. Yeah, that's pretty pricey.
Get it right.
Do we know if he took other images of this and then chose this one as his best?
We absolutely know.
Yeah.
And John was saying that
Oh,
he got off one shot and then the sun went behind the clouds and that was it. If he'd been driving a little slower or spent more time with Georgia O'Keeffe, it wouldn't have happened.
Well, how long, I wonder, does it take to change, take out the big 8x10 film and then turn it around and put it back in? How long does that take? A minute?
It's fast.
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
5
seconds or so.
Yeah.
When the sun goes, it goes.
Well, that's true.
Even actually, if you look carefully at the print, you can see that there's sunlight here, and then down here along the river, illuminating the cottonwoods, there's light, but up in here there's shadow, and then there's a band of light on the Sangres, and then it's dark up on the top of this peak. But this in the back that's higher is light again. So there were these bands in the west and the sun was coming through those.
Well, David, after you mentioned your first telescope, I had to run down to my basement and you might get a kick out of this.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I've got to get your image. Oh, wow, you've got one in the box.
Yeah.
I hope it's out of the box.
Yours Altaz or Equatorial?
Ball joint.
All joint, okay.
Yeah, so altitude azimuth, yeah.
Yeah.
Had a little plastic lens, which I don't think works. I think the most enjoyment I got out of it was that it had a little solar filter adapter that would project the image. So anytime there was an eclipse, I would watch it through that. But that was my very first telescope.
So I got a better eyepiece for it. And that helped a lot.
That's really
Yeah,
cool.
I think the mirror on this thing's only about this big.
Oh, okay. I'm pretty sure mine was 4.5. It was a big, and it had a strange kind of an equatorial mount with a spring and a tighten down a thumb screw on it to get the tension on it.
There we go.
Yeah, that's smaller than mine.
Yeah. It wasn't very good, but it got me started.
You know, it amazes me that there's a lot of places out there that say, yeah, buy the best telescope you can afford. And honestly, as you know, you're saying it, this was my experience too. I had a little reflector that had that piece of glass mirror was 3 inches around, maybe. It was tiny. And I had such enjoyment out of that thing. I'm saying go buy a $20 telescope and enjoy the crud out of it. And then when you're hooked, then go and spend the money. And then spend the big money. Or even a little money.
Same thing applies to cameras.
That's very true. I don't know.
I think a good starting tool is a pair of binoculars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone remembers, back in the probably mid-90s, there was a partial solar eclipse. And I was working over at Coal Creek, and the only way we could watch it was by using the telescope backwards and projecting it on the belly of one of the guys who had a black t-shirt on. It was perfect.
Story.
Who was that guy?
It was probably, I could probably come up with a name if I had to.
And that was at the K-8 Coal Creek Canyon school.
Well, back
That's
then
great.
it would have been a K6 or K6.
It was a K6 then, yeah.
Was that July of 91?
That would be a bit late. It was probably was earlier than that.
I think there's
We went to school in July.
There was an annular in May of 94, and it would have been partial here around here.
Yeah. I went with a friend down to Roswell, New Mexico to watch that one. That's the first eclipse chasing that I've done.
I was in 5th grade.
I was out in Area 51 during the summer of 90 when there was a fabulous eclipse. Yeah. Was working as an ecologist at that test site.
Cool.
Wow.
We got a very unique glance at the moon, the sun, yeah.
So
and all the strange things in the sky.
The annular eclipse you were mentioning from the Chiricahua Mountains in southeastern Arizona.
Ooh. Karen, did you remember for sure that it happened when you were in 5th grade? In that case, we know the exact year.
I was in 5th grade, so it would have been about 81.
It was the Rosen boy that played Snoopy.
That's who that person was?
Greg Rosen.
Oh, okay.
What a memory. Wow. What a memory.
I remember him because the kids came back. He came back and apologized for being such a rotten kid when he was in 5th and 6th grade. And I said I appreciated him because every time he got in trouble, he'd admit it instead of lying.
Good character.
Mm-hmm.
And I should go back and apologize huge to my student, my student.
Susie, when I saw that punch card, the computer punch card, you were at NCAR, right? And you used a bunch of those, didn't you?
It was computer center, so I would take them from the graduate students and run them through the computer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
And if they were binaries, they had a lot of holes, and if you held them wrong, they just went like shoo everywhere.
Yep.
That's great.
Well, you only did that once, and then you learned all the cool techniques to make sure that if you did drop them, you could put them back together in the right order.
Yeah, we suggested numbering them. You know, it's like, because it's going to happen.
Well, thank goodness it never happened to me. My advisor would have killed me if I had dropped his cards. I'm still here, so I didn't die.
So, yeah, for some of the
along the edge.
Yeah.
So
Like
for some of the younger people, no, go ahead. For some of the younger people, that card, you know, explain, I don't know if David, you want to do that, or Susie, but explain what, or John, but, you know, how were those a thing before we had all this new technology? Like how all those little punch, well, I might see a hanging Chad there, I think. No, I couldn't resist.
Never really gone there.
Yeah, but so how did those work with these supercomputers back then? You know, you obviously put in a bunch of cards, and why? How is it that was it zeros and ones? I guess I don't really know either, but you know, how did that work?
Each card represents one line of a program. And so you could see the line typed across the top, and then vertically below that, there would be a certain hole pattern that would encode that letter at the top. So if you had a 50-line computer program, you had 50 cards.
And they had Fortran that they used a lot for science. But that was all your formatting too. You know, it's like your HTML before that. You had to format it as well as tell it what to do.
Did you work on one of the key punches that had the drum card, and you'd put a card on the drum card and that would set your formatting?
Yeah.
So then when the new card came in for you to type, it would go exactly to the right column. And then you'd type like a line number and then jump to the next column and then start typing your code in.
There was a panel that had wires, and you would wire it so that it could do that. And then we had microfiche that we did a lot of microfiche that, you know, NCAR was all science. So it was fun. It was fun back then. And it was mostly grad students. I worked with Richard Keene in '72. So, you know, it's like a lot of history in the making.
And we got married there in '73.
What?
That was just like 2 years ago, right?
Did you know that before computers were invented, punch cards were used by the Swiss to make lace? And they would use the same sort of punch card, and it would tell the lace machine, make a knot here, make a knot there. And you come out with this beautiful, intricate piece of lace.
Oh, wow.
And that was 100 years before computers.
I used those exact same cards labeled Kitt Peak National Observatory using punch machines in Tucson in the early 70s.
All right, that's what we had in Sunspot. Came over from Tucson.
That's
so what
cool.
was the,
Come a long ways, baby.
what was it?
I did mine all on the calculator.
So Clark, what were you specifically doing with those cards?
Oh,
Clark, what were you working on then? I think you're muted though.
Rose like Clark. Oh, there he comes.
Okay. Yeah.
Clark's muted.
Yeah. What were you working on?
Can't hear what's being said. What's working. So Thanks for the presentation. It was great.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Loved it.
Thank you so much.
Really? So we have about 15 more minutes before some of us have to go out to Howl at 8 o'clock. And we could even stay on after that if some people want to. But is there anything else people want to share, either about future speakers they'd like, or you know, just anything else, or just, you know, surviving this pandemic? Leonard and I were inside for 3.5 months, and we got out Friday to get gas, and Saturday went to Netherlands to get a battery. So now we don't have to call AAA to charge us. And that's a big move, change for us. But, you know, anything else?
We had,
anyone what was that?
we had a bear break in on Friday.
You're
Your
pretty
house?
segment.
We had a bear, yeah.
Now I know where to come get those chocolate covered chestnuts or whatever it was that he got a hold of.
Cashews and
Cashews.
Dove chocolates.
Smart bear.
Wait, that it got some of your chocolates? Really?
Pried open the window, tore out the screen, came in the living room, went directly to the kitchen and got the candy and the nuts and stuff and some cat food, made a big mess, but left how
Were
it
you
came.
not home? Were you not home then? Or?
We probably came home 20 minutes after he left, but I took some pictures of him outside. He was hanging around outside eating some of the cashews.
We weren't gone very long. I just walked over to the neighbors and it just like.
Yeah, had we been in, he wouldn't. I mean,
You had your screen door. Oh, you didn't have the door. Like he just walked in through the screen,
I was
right?
like, no, he came through a window. He broke a window, broke a
Oh,
latch.
really?
pried the window open.
Didn't break any glass or anything, but it was, you know, like.
It's a courteous bear.
What?
You report that to Jan, you know, if you haven't. Well, now you have.
Susie says it's a courteous bear. It really didn't do too much damage.
He didn't tear the refrigerator apart or take a dump or anything. He just like had his chocolate and cashews and.
He took the hummingbird feeders down too, but that's happened before.
That's normal.
But the best part is it didn't take a dump, because I understand that's very smelly.
On the carpet, yeah, would not have been good.
That way, yeah.
It was really early. It wasn't dark or anything. You know, we've lived up here a long time, and that, I guess, is yeah, we were surprised. Anyway, that was our great adventure.
How will you keep him from coming back?
I don't know. We're watching.
We're watching, yeah, we gotta monitor everything. We're home, so it makes it easier to do it. When I took pictures of him eating the cashews, he, you know, actually walked out there and he wasn't moving. So I hit him with a couple of rocks and then he moved. So that might have discouraged him from coming back. I can still throw.
Smart.
Yeah.
We're on the map now. We're on his bear map.
Yeah. And they remember year to year.
Oh, yeah.
But a fed bear is a dead bear. We don't want that to happen.
Right.
So we're trying to be respectful and encourage him not to do that again.
Yeah,
I don't know how well it works, but I've heard that they really don't like the smell of ammonia.
Right.
So I have taken the habit of, if I leave my place, I'm going to be gone for a while, I'll just sprinkle some ammonia on the doormat outside the door, hoping it stays smelly long enough. And that bears are supposed to be very sensitive to smell, so maybe they'll just go, ew, I don't want to go up there.
Dewey's
That's
house.
true of rattlesnakes. That's true of rattlesnakes as well. They don't like ammonia or mothballs.
The smell of it, or what, or slithering?
It irritates their skin, and yeah. They won't
Ammonia
come
has
back.
a habit of dissipating very quickly.
Yeah.
Mothballs work with raccoons.
That sounds about
Yes.
All these are so stinky.
Did you know that skunks are immune to rattlesnake bites? So keep a skunk around.
We've got a few here. Yeah, a few. Yeah. So any other comments people want to make, or future speakers that you'd like to hear? I think Leonard mentioned that he wants to do this UFO panel sometime in the future. Just talk about aspects of that. But we've got a number of people we could bring in for talks.
I do have a question. This is the first talk I've attended, and a colleague of mine that worked at NCAR actually forwarded me the invitation. So is there a way to get on the mailing list for future talks? Or?
Sure. Yeah. Are you in Coal Creek Canyon?
No, I'm actually over in Superior.
Oh, okay.
And so did your friend get the invite from FRAC?
I'm not sure. I'll have to ask her. She knows I'm new into astrophotography, so she thought, well, maybe you'll find this interesting. And as I read it,
John, he can just email SkyWatchers the email he got the invitation from,
Well,
couldn't he? Or my email.
Well, it depends on how he got it. So if you got an invite from somebody, there's an email in there that you can respond to, or you can go.
You could just tell us and we'll write it down.
Well, you can also send an email straight to me, which is terazoomer@yahoo.com. TERAZOOMER. And you can send me an email.
I believe there was somebody to respond to on the email, as I recall. I can't pull it up now, but.
And I also,
SkyWatchers website.
Yeah, I think on the SkyWatchers. So it's sky-watchers.co. If you go to that, website, there's you can join our mailing list there.
Oh, that'd be great. So,
but and
I'm curious to hear stories on some astrophotography. So,
well, if you got astrophotography to share, you can.
We meet at the Coal Creek Canyon Community Center, and it's great. And all the telescopes go out in the parking lot.
Oh, great!
With the virus, we've done this instead, but
yeah,
it will be back.
Susie.
Really close to Superior. It's only 20 minutes away. Well, except we have.
Yeah, I just bought a SkyWatcher tracker that I'm starting to play with a little bit now, so I'm trying to figure it out. And then I know you were talking about filters earlier. When you do astrophotography, it's a whole new education on filters, hydrogen alpha, all that stuff. So, and I've only done landscape photography, so this is new, but it's fun.
And Sam has a SkyWatcher telescope too, right, Sam? So maybe you could help him with that.
Actually,
I think he's talking about a tracking mount, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and right now I'm using some Canon long lenses and a Canon 6D, but eventually I'll probably look at a Red Cat 51.
Yeah, I have a Canon 6D as well, but when you do get a telescope, you can mount that 6D right to the telescope itself.
Yeah, I have a Celestron that I bought the adapter for here. Yeah. I have to drop off, but I want to thank you for the talk. It was interesting. I thought it was really interesting. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, come on back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from tonight, 6:30, for another great talk. And but yeah, I think if you need help with your telescope, we have a number of astrophotographers and telescope experts who could probably help you. So if you send an email to John, he'll put you on the list. Yeah, so Tara Zoomer.
Well, he can go to the website, sky-watchers.
Go to the website, yeah. And just for all of you, take a look at our website. I think you all have the link for that, and it's in the Mountain Messenger, our local publication up here. But John's done a lot of work on putting other videos on it. And will this be on the website then too, John?
Well, I recorded it, and I'll see what it turns out like. This is the first time I've recorded a Zoom meeting, so should be fine. I'll put that on the site too.
Hi, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Richard.
See you guys.
Hi, Richard.
Are you going to continue to allow frac to?
Yeah.
Well, the same
Promote
thing.
your-
The same
So,
thing applies
so
to
for
you.
people who don't know what FRAC is, Front
Oh.
Range Astronomy Community or Astronomical Community?
Yeah.
And you're online, you don't usually meet, or is that true?
We're online. No, we don't.
Oh.
As far as I know, they don't meet.
It's an email list.
Yeah.
So Barb and John and I were talking about expanding invitations more widely than just to the Cold Creek Canyon SkyWatchers, and batted around, and I sent an email to Robert Arnn, who is the moderator of FRAC, to ask him if he thought it would be appropriate for an invitation to go out to FRAC as opposed to just locally, and whether it was apropos or whether he would consider it spam going to FRAC. And his response was no, he thought it was appropriate. So I submitted the invitation to Front Range Astronomical Community.
And I appreciate that.
So that's how it happened this time.
I would love any of you.
You know, I
Same-
didn't see the FRAC posting for this meeting. But
Only some FRAC members got it.
I don't know, but Robert Arnn was on with us for a while here. I saw his name show up.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So
Also the BASS, Boulder Astronomy and Space Society, we could put it out to them as well. And then I know or John from Denver, do you know if they are doing a Zoom meeting now too?
they have been doing a few Zoom meetings. I haven't gotten a notification for one for a few weeks, but they've been having them roughly every 3 weeks, maybe also.
Yeah. And it'd be good for our members to know about that.
I'm looking at their website right now, and I don't see anything on their calendar for announced meetings.
Well, that's something we've talked about doing, is reaching out to the other societies in the area. We should just be a little more diligent. We haven't done that. But Chuck, if you want to go to the website, you can sign up for our newsletter, and we send it out like right before the meeting, so you would know when we're going to meet and then what we're going to talk about. So,
Oh, good.
or we can try to reach out to FRAC and DAS and BASS and other places too.
So in my talking with colleagues about sending out invitations, I got a feeling from them that if those clubs were interested in some presentations like mine, give it to that club. And that FRAC not having any meetings in itself was a little bit of a different entity. So that sending an invitation to it is different from inviting BASS members, for example. But I don't know, we can try talking to some other clubs. I'm a member of 3 or 4.
Well, if you want to, that'd be great. I've got I used to go down to the Denver meetings, but I stopped. I only went to a couple, and I stopped a long time ago.
I also want to mention, I think it's Mile High Telescope. I don't know if they're back with Open Doors, but they're a great store, and I guess they're related to Denver Astronomical Society, right?
Right.
Yeah.
A couple of
So yeah, the weather's getting really good for being out there looking through a telescope. So if you don't have one, consider them. Or if there's anyone in our group who has one for sale, and we have one, a Celestron, that was given to us we need to get a tripod stand for it, but you know, we can hand that out as a loaner too. We haven't looked through it yet, but you know, if anyone has a stand that they aren't using, you know, that would fit this, that would be great. But we don't have extra funds for buying that, but I will look into it over the summer.
What
And
kind of,
also John's Coal Creek Canyon sky map is on the website for June if you need it. Or if you want to look at that, you can download it. Any other comments? Because we're time for the 8 o'clock howl. If
Yeah. See you later.
Okay, Judy.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Got
Thanks,
30
guys.
seconds.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.